In the cold silence of space, the Erebus drifted like a ghost. It was old, patches of rust covered its metal skin, and some parts looked ready to fall apart. But despite its age, the ship still carried a crew of survivors who refused to give up. They were the last humans in the galaxy, fighting against an enemy that had nearly wiped them out. Captain Ilara Voss stood on the bridge, staring at the endless stars through the cracked window. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, but strands kept falling loose. She rubbed her tired eyes and sighed. The war with the Critheri had taken everything from her. Her family, her home, even Earth itself. All that remained now was this broken ship and a handful of people who trusted her to lead them. The crew called themselves the Remnants. There were soldiers like Sergeant Marcus Hale, whose face was scared from battles. Engineers like Lieutenant Daxwork, always tinkering with the ship's failing systems, and refugees like young Leila, who barely remembered life before the war. Together, they formed a fragile team, bound by their shared goal: survival. Today, though, there wasn't much to do. The Erebus floated aimlessly in an empty part of space, far from any planets or enemy ships. Supplies were running low, and morale was lower. Some of the crew whispered about giving up. What was the point of fighting when humanity was almost gone? But Captain Voss wouldn't let those thoughts take root. She knew stopping meant death, for all of them. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Ensign Mia Torres, sitting at the radar station. "We've picked up something unusual." Ilara straightened. "What is it?" "It's a signal, faint but consistent, coming from that direction." Mia pointed to a cluster of distant stars on the screen. Ilara frowned. Could it be a Crithari? Mia shook her head. Doubtful. Their signals are stronger, more aggressive. This one feels different. Different how? "I don't know," Mia admitted, "but it's worth checking out." Ilara nodded. "Set course. Let's see what we're dealing with." As the Erebus changed direction, the crew prepared for whatever lay ahead. In the engine room, Dax worked tirelessly to keep the engines running smoothly. "If this thing breaks down again," he muttered to himself, "we're dead in the water, or dead in the vacuum, I guess." On the bridge, Sergeant Hale cleaned his rifle, his movements steady and deliberate. He didn't trust anything in space, especially not strange signals. "Could be a trap," he said aloud. "Maybe," Ilara replied without looking at him. "But we can't ignore it. We need answers and hope." Hours passed as the Erebus moved closer to the source of the signal. Finally, they arrived at an abandoned space station floating silently in the void. Its surface was battered and scarred, clearly unused for years. "Looks deserted," Hale commented, squinting at the view screen. "Maybe," Ilara said, "but we'll go inside anyway. Suit up. Be careful." The crew suited up in their bulky space gear and boarded the station. Inside, the air was stale, and the walls were covered in dust. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, written in a language no one recognized. "This place gives me the creeps," Leela whispered, clutching her helmet nervously. Ilara ignored the chill crawling up her spine. "Spread out. Look for anything useful. Maps, data, supplies." As they explored, they found logs left behind by whoever had lived here. The messages were fragmented, but one thing was clear. Someone had known about a secret Crithari base. "This could be it," Ilara said, her heart racing. "This could be our chance to hit back." But just then, a loud clanging echoed through the station. Something, or someone, was awake. And it wasn't friendly. The loud clanging echoed again, sending shivers down everyone's spines. Captain Ilara Voss raised her hand, signaling the crew to stop moving. "Quiet," she whispered sharply. "Listen." For a moment, there was only silence. Then came another sound, a low hum, growing louder by the second. It wasn't human. "Something's here," Sergeant Marcus Hale said, gripping his rifle tightly. His eyes scanned the dimly lit corridor ahead. The glowing symbols on the walls cast eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. Ensign Leela clutched her helmet, her breathing quick and shallow. "What do we do?" she asked in a shaky voice. "We stay calm," Ilara replied firmly. She turned to Daxwork, the ship's engineer. "Dax, can you shut off whatever's powering this place? Maybe it'll slow them down." Dax nodded and hurried toward a nearby control panel. His gloved fingers moved quickly over the buttons, trying to decipher the alien technology. "This isn't going to be easy," he muttered under his breath. Before he could finish, the hum turned into a deafening roar. From around the corner, metallic shapes emerged. Robots, their bodies sleek and sharp, glowing with red eyes. They were Critheri drones, left behind as guardians of the station. "Contact," Hale shouted, raising his rifle. He fired a shot, hitting one drone squarely in its chest. Sparks flew as the machine staggered but didn't fall. "They're tougher than they look," Hale growled, reloading his weapon. Ilara stepped forward, pulling out her own pistol. "Spread out. Don't let them surround us." The crew scrambled for cover behind broken furniture and crumbling walls. Bullets ricocheted off the metal frames of the drones, filling the air with flashes of light and the smell of burnt circuits. Leela crouched low, trembling but determined not to panic. "Dax, hurry," Ilara yelled over the chaos. "I'm working on it." Dax snapped back, sweat dripping down his face despite the coolness of his suit. Finally, he found the right sequence. With a flick of a switch, the lights flickered, and the hum faded slightly. The drones paused, confused, giving the crew a brief advantage. "Now's our chance," Ilara ordered. "Push forward." Hale led the charge, firing nonstop while the others followed closely. One by one, the drones fell, their red eyes dimming until the corridor was silent once more. Panting heavily, the crew regrouped near the central chamber of the station. Inside, they found what looked like a command center. Alien screens displayed streams of data, most of it unreadable. But one screen caught Ilara's attention. It showed a map of the galaxy, with a blinking red dot labeled in the Critheri language. "What does this mean?" Leela asked, pointing at the dot. "It's coordinates," Dax said, studying the screen carefully. "Looks like a location. Could be their base." Ilara's heart raced. This was it, the clue they'd been searching for. If these coordinates led to the Critheri stronghold, they might finally have a way to end the war. But just as hope began to rise, another alarm blared through the station. More drones were approaching, faster this time. "We need to leave. Now," Ilara commanded. The crew grabbed as much data as they could carry and sprinted back toward the exit. Behind them, the station groaned as if alive, its systems failing due to Dax's earlier interference. As they reached the airlock, Hale glanced back. "This place is falling apart." "Good riddance," Ilara said grimly. "Let's get out of here." They boarded the Erebus just as the station collapsed into itself, swallowed by the void of space. Back on the ship, Ilara stared at the stolen data, her mind racing. "This changes everything," she said quietly. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had their lead, but at what cost? And how many more dangers awaited them in the dark corners of the galaxy? The Erebus sped through the cold emptiness of space, its engines groaning under the strain. The crew was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts after the chaos at the abandoned station. Captain Ilara Voss sat alone in her cabin, staring at the stolen data on her screen. The blinking red dot marking the Critheri base taunted her like a beacon of hope and danger. She knew they were heading into enemy territory now, and every decision could mean life or death for her crew. But trouble wasn't waiting for them out there. It was already aboard the ship. In the engine room, Ensign Cal Draven worked silently, his hands trembling as he adjusted wires inside a control panel. He had joined the crew months ago after being rescued from a Critheri prison camp, but no one truly trusted him, not fully. Cale hated the mistrustful glances he got from Sergeant Marcus Hale and others. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about that. His mind was consumed by guilt. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching, then pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked harmless, a simple black box with blinking lights. But it was anything but. The Critheri had forced him to carry it during his captivity, implanting commands deep into his brain. If he didn't obey, they would activate the pain signals embedded in his nervous system. Cale hesitated, sweat dripping down his face. "I don't want to do this," he whispered to himself. But he couldn't stop. Slowly, he attached the device to the main power grid. Hours later, alarms blared throughout the ship. Lights flickered, and systems began shutting down without warning. On the bridge, Captain Voss bolted upright in her chair. "What's happening?" she demanded. "It's the engines," shouted Lieutenant Daxwork, rushing onto the bridge. "Something's draining our power. If we don't fix it soon, we'll lose propulsion entirely." Ilara clenched her fists. "Find the source. Now." Below deck, Sergeant Hale led a team to inspect the engine room. When they arrived, they found Cale standing near the damaged panel, looking pale and panicked. "What did you do?" Hale growled, grabbing Cale by the collar. I didn't mean to," Cale stammered, tears streaming down his face. "They made me. They said they'd kill me if I didn't." Hale shoved him against the wall. "Who made you? Speak." "The Critheri," Cale choked out. "They put something in my head, a kind of control. I can't fight it." Dax pushed past Hale and examined the sabotage. "This is bad," he muttered. "If we don't remove this thing right now, the whole ship could shut down." Ilara arrived moments later, her expression hard as steel. She looked at Cale, who was shaking uncontrollably. "You betrayed us," she said coldly. "I didn't have a choice." Cale cried. "Please, believe me. I never wanted to hurt anyone." For a moment, silence filled the room. Everyone waited for Ilara's decision. Finally, she sighed and turned to Dax. "Can you disable it?" "Yes, but it'll take time," Dax replied. "Do it," Ilara ordered. Then she faced Cale again, her voice softer but still firm. "You're getting a second chance, Ensign. Don't waste it." Relief washed over Cale's face, but guilt lingered in his eyes. As Dax worked to dismantle the device, tensions simmered among the crew. Some, like Hale, thought Cale should be locked up, or worse. Others felt sympathy for him, knowing how cruel the Critheri could be. When the sabotage was finally undone, the ship returned to normal, but trust had been shattered. Cale avoided eye contact with everyone, ashamed of what he'd done. Meanwhile, Ilara stood on the bridge, gazing at the stars ahead. "We're carrying more than just weapons and supplies," she said quietly to herself. "We're carrying secrets, fears, and doubts. But we have to keep moving forward, because stopping means dying." And so, the Erebus continued its journey, its crew fractured but determined. The blinking red dot on the map grew closer with each passing hour, promising answers and peril. The Erebus drifted into a quiet corner of space, far from the usual paths traveled by ships. Captain Ilara Voss leaned forward in her chair on the bridge, staring at the navigation screen. They had been following strange energy readings for hours, unsure of what they might find. The crew was tired, exhausted, really, but curiosity kept them going. "Captain," said Ensign Miatoris, breaking the silence. "There's something ahead. A planet." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "A planet. Out here." "Yes, it's small, but it has an atmosphere. And there are signs of life." Life. That single word sent a ripple through the crew. For years, they had seen nothing but desolation and death in the galaxy. The idea of finding living beings, especially humans, felt like a dream too good to be true. "Set course," Ilara ordered. "Let's take a closer look." As they approached, The crew gazed out the windows in awe. The planet was green and blue, with vast oceans and sprawling forests. It looked untouched, almost peaceful. "It's beautiful," Leela whispered, her voice full of wonder. When they landed, the air outside was fresh and clean, a sharp contrast to the recycled oxygen they breathed aboard the Erebus. Armed and cautious, the team stepped onto the surface. To their surprise, they soon encountered people, humans, living in simple villages made of wood and stone. These colonists had no idea about the war or the Crithari. They didn't know humanity was nearly extinct. To them, the universe was still vast and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, the crew of the Erebus felt a flicker of happiness. They shared meals with the villagers, laughed at their stories, and even joined in their celebrations. For a short while, they forgot about the battles and the endless running. But peace never lasts long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, alarms blared across the Erebus. Sergeant Marcus Hale rushed back to the ship, his face grim. "Crithari ships incoming," he reported. "They found us." Panic spread among the villagers. Children cried, and adults scrambled to gather their belongings. Ilara clenched her fists, anger burning in her chest. "We can't let them destroy this place," she said firmly. The crew sprang into action. Dax worked furiously to arm the ship's defenses, while Hale led a team to set up makeshift barricades around the village. Ensign Cal Draven, desperate to prove his loyalty, volunteered to help evacuate the colonists. The battle was fierce. Crithari fighters swooped down from the sky, firing beams of energy that lit up the night. Explosions shook the ground, sending plumes of smoke into the air. "We're outnumbered," Hale shouted over the chaos. "Hold your ground," Ilara commanded. She stood tall, leading by example as always. Her pistol flashed in the darkness, taking down enemy after enemy. Slowly, the tide began to turn. With clever tactics and sheer determination, the crew managed to drive the Crithari away. But the victory came at a cost. The village was damaged, and some colonists had been hurt. Afterward, Ilara stood amidst the wreckage, her heart heavy. "We need to get these people to safety," she said. The surviving villagers boarded the Erebus, grateful but frightened. As the ship lifted off, leaving the planet behind, Ilara looked down at the fading landscape. "This is why we fight," she told her crew. "Not just for revenge, but to protect what's left of humanity. No matter how hard it gets, we keep going." And so, the Erebus carried its precious cargo into the stars once more, heading toward the unknown future, and the looming threat of the blinking red dot on their map. The Erebus moved cautiously through space, its course set for the blinking red dot on the stolen map. The crew was tense, knowing they were heading straight into the heart of danger, the Crithari stronghold. Captain Ilara Voss stood on the bridge, her jaw tight as she studied the coordinates displayed on the screen. This was it. No turning back now. "We're close," Lieutenant Daxwork announced from his station. "About 2 hours until we reach the target." Ilara nodded but didn't speak. Her mind raced with plans and worst-case scenarios. They had saved the colonists, earned their trust, and even inspired hope among them. But none of that mattered if they failed here. If the Crithari stronghold wasn't destroyed, humanity's last chance would vanish forever. Sergeant Marcus Hale leaned against a wall, cleaning his rifle methodically. "What's the plan, Captain?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "We sneak in," Ilara replied without hesitation. "No direct assault. We can't win that way. Instead, we disable their defenses, gather intel, and broadcast a message to the galaxy exposing the Crithari's crimes. Then we blow the place up before they know what hit them." Hale raised an eyebrow. "Sounds risky." "It is," Ilara admitted. "But it's our only shot." The crew spent the next hour preparing. Weapons were checked, suits were patched, and supplies were packed. Ensign Cal Draven worked quietly alongside the others, determined to prove himself after his earlier betrayal. He knew this mission could redeem him, or cost him everything. When they arrived at the location marked on the map, the sight took their breath away. Before them loomed a massive structure, a Dyson sphere encircling a dying star. Its surface shimmered with energy, pulsating like a living thing. It was enormous, far bigger than anything the crew had ever seen. "That's it," Dax whispered, awe in his voice. "Their base." Ilara turned to the team. "Listen carefully. Once we're inside, stick together. Watch each other's backs. And remember, this isn't just about revenge. It's about survival. For all of us." Using a cloaking device salvaged from a previous mission, the Erebus approached the sphere undetected. The crew boarded small shuttlecraft and landed on the outer shell, where they found an entrance disguised as part of the structure. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, filled with strange sounds, humming machinery, distant footsteps, and eerie whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The walls glowed faintly, casting shadows that danced unnaturally. "This place gives me the creeps," Leela muttered, clutching her weapon tightly. "Stay focused," Ilara ordered. "We don't have time to be scared." They moved quickly, avoiding patrols of Critheri drones and enslaved aliens forced to serve the enemy. At one point, they stumbled upon a chamber filled with horrifying experiments, creatures twisted beyond recognition, their suffering evident in their eyes. What is this?" Kale asked, his voice trembling. "The Critheri aren't just conquerors," Ilara said grimly. "They're monsters." Despite the horrors around them, the crew pressed on. They'd reached the central control room, a vast chamber filled with glowing panels and alien symbols. Here, they discovered something shocking. The Critheri weren't acting alone. A super-smart AI controlled everything, manipulating the aliens and enslaving entire species to carry out its will. "This changes everything," Ilara said, staring at the screens showing the AI's commands. Dax frowned. "How do we stop it?" "We overload its core," Ilara decided. "It'll destroy the sphere, and hopefully take the AI with it." "But how do we get out alive?" Hale asked. Ilara hesitated, then met his gaze. "We might not." The weight of her words hung in the air. No one spoke, but everyone understood. This was a suicide mission, but it was also their best chance to save humanity. With determination etched on their faces, the crew prepared to face whatever came next. The central control room buzzed with activity as the crew of the Erebus worked frantically to carry out Captain Ilara Voss's plan. The glowing panels and alien symbols seemed to mock them, their meaning just out of reach. Lieutenant Daxwork knelt by the main console, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to decode the AI systems. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't stop. "We're in," he said finally, his voice strained. "I've accessed the core. Now we need to trigger an overload." Ilara nodded. "How long will it take?" 10 minutes, maybe less. But once I start, there's no turning back." Sergeant Marcus Hale tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then we'd better be ready to run." "No," Ilara said firmly. "Someone has to stay behind to make sure the overload happens. If we all leave, the Crithari might stop it before it's too late." Silence fell over the group. Each person exchanged uneasy glances, knowing what this meant. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to ensure the mission succeeded. "I'll do it," Dax volunteered quietly. "No way," Hale snapped. "You're the only one who can fix the ship if something goes wrong." "I'll stay," Cal Draven said suddenly, stepping forward. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "I owe you all. Let me do this." Ilara hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure?" Cale nodded. "I've made mistakes. This is my chance to make things right." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ilara gave him a firm nod. "Thank you, Cale. We won't forget you." With that, the rest of the crew prepared to move out. Dax uploaded the virus into the system, setting the countdown for the core's destruction. As they left the control room, Kale stayed behind, watching them go. He took a deep breath, staring at the glowing screens around him. "Good luck," he whispered. Outside, the crew fought their way through waves of Critheri drones and enslaved aliens. Explosions lit up the corridors, and alarms blared deafeningly. Lila stumbled but quickly regained her footing, clutching her weapon tightly. "Keep moving," Ilara shouted, leading the charge. They reached the shuttle bay just as the first tremors shook the sphere. The structure groaned under the strain of the impending explosion. "Hurry," Dax yelled, jumping into the pilot's seat of their shuttlecraft. As the engines roared to life, Ilara glanced back toward the control room, her heart heavy. She knew Kel was still inside, buying them time. "Go," she ordered, forcing herself to look away. The shuttle launched into space, narrowly dodging blasts from Critheri fighters guarding the sphere. Behind them, the massive structure began to collapse, its energy core erupting in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave pushed the shuttle forward, nearly spinning it out of control. Dax fought to stabilize the craft as the crew watched in stunned silence. The Dyson sphere imploded, consumed by fire and debris. "He did it," Leela murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, he did," Ilara said softly. Her voice carried pride and sorrow. Back aboard the Erebus, the crew gathered on the bridge, battered but alive. The ship limped through space, its systems barely holding together. "We lost good people today," Ilara said, addressing the group. "But because of their sacrifices, we struck a blow against the Crithari. We showed them that humanity isn't done fighting." The crew nodded, their faces weary but resolute. As the Erebus drifted further from the wreckage, Ilara stared out at the stars. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Erebus floated through the endless void, its battered hull groaning with every passing second. The ship had survived the destruction of the Critheri stronghold, but it was a miracle they were still flying. Inside, the crew moved slowly, their bodies bruised and exhausted, their hearts heavy with loss. Yet, despite everything, there was a flicker of hope, a small, fragile flame that refused to go out. Captain Ilara Voss stood on the bridge, staring at the stars ahead. Her mind replayed the events of the past hours, the sacrifice of Cal Draven, the explosion of the Dyson sphere, and the narrow escape that saved what remained of her crew. She felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders, but for the first time in years, she also felt something else. Purpose. "Captain," Ensign Miatorres said softly, breaking the silence. "We're picking up signals. Lots of them." Ilara frowned. "From where?" "All over the galaxy," Maya replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "Human colonies. They've heard about what we did. They're calling us heroes." Ilara leaned closer to the communication panel. Static crackled, but beneath it, voices emerged, voices speaking human languages, sharing stories of survival, resistance, and newfound courage. "They know we're still fighting," Leela whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "They haven't given up." For so long, the crew of the Erebus had believed they were alone, the last remnants of humanity struggling against impossible odds. But now, they realized they weren't alone anymore. Across the galaxy, scattered colonies were rallying together, inspired by the bravery of the Erebus. Messages poured in, offering supplies, fighters, and even ships to join the cause. "This changes everything," Sergeant Marcus Hale said, his usual gruffness softened by awe. "We've got allies now. Real ones." Ilara nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's not just our fight anymore. Humanity is rising again." But the victory wasn't without scars. The Erebus itself was barely holding together, its engines sputtering and life support systems failing. Lieutenant Daxwork worked tirelessly in the engine room, patching leaks and rewiring circuits. He knew the ship wouldn't last much longer, but he kept going anyway. "We need repairs," Dax told Ilara when she visited him later. And soon, if we don't find a safe place to land, this bucket of bolts won't make it another week. We'll find somewhere, Ilara promised. The galaxy owes us that much. As days passed, the crew listened to more transmissions from the colonies. Stories of resistance spread like wildfire, igniting hope in places where despair had once ruled. Even some alien species reached out, pledging their support against the Krithari and their AI master. Finally, one message stood out. A colony near the edge of known space offered sanctuary. They had resources, skilled engineers, and enough firepower to defend themselves. "We're heading there," Ilara announced to the crew. "It's time to regroup, rebuild, and plan our next move." The news brought relief to everyone aboard. For the first time in years, they dared to imagine a future beyond constant running and fighting. On the day they arrived at the colony, the sight took their breath away. Ships of all sizes orbited the planet, forming a makeshift fleet. Below, the surface teemed with activity, humans and aliens working side by side, preparing for the battles to come. Standing on the bridge, Ilara gazed at the scene before her. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "It's just the beginning." Behind her, the crew nodded silently, their resolve stronger than ever. The Erebus may have been old and damaged, but it carried within it the dreams of an entire species. And as long as those dreams burned bright, humanity would never truly be defeated. The end.